What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, here with my partner, Jack Markowski. It's a sad day in the Steel City. The Pitt Panthers have been left out of the 2024 NCAA Tournament. Their season is over. We'll get to that in a little bit. They have declined a bid to the NIT as well. So the Panthers will not be playing in any more postseason basketball. They end the year 22, and 11, 12 and 8 in ACC play. And they just narrowly missed the NCAA tournament field, according to the selection committee. Jack, a disappointing day. We talked about this after the North Carolina loss. Neither of us seemed very optimistic about their odds making the big dance, so I assume you weren't necessarily very surprised when you watched the selection show this afternoon.
Yeah, it didn't come as much of a surprise. I think there was still a little bit of hope that they would sneak in. There's always a surprise or two teams that make the field, but just with the amount of bid stealers, the amount of craziness on the bubble this year, more so than any other year in recent memory, it was, expected. They were the fourth team in the first four out, super crowded bubble. And one thing that stuck out to me too is that even if they beat UNC and still lost to NC State, assuming everything else stayed the same, all the other bid stealers went on to win their conference, I don't think Pitt makes the tournament still. Which is pretty crazy to say, considering that UNC ended up as a 1 seed. That would have been a quad 1A win too. So, I think there were some questionable decisions by the selection committee. We'll get into that a little bit. But overall, today was not much of a surprise. I didn't go into today expecting that Pitt was going to end up in the field, and they didn't. It was sort of went as expected.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think I went into today not super optimistic about their chances, obviously, and the more things happened, the more things kind of unfolded over this weekend, over those final 2 days where they weren't playing, where they were idle leading into Selection Sunday. It just kind of confirmed that for me. You saw all these bid stealers rattle off wins. I got home from the stadium, after their semifinal game to lost to North Carolina, and I'm watching, New Mexico pull off a conference championship win. I'm watching, Oregon and Colorado pull off some wins like that. And then today you're watching Duquesne, New Mexico, and even NC State over the weekend as well. You're just watching all of these bubble teams do what they need to do, and nothing has fallen Pitt's way. And started to feel inevitable. It also felt inevitable when I was back in Pittsburgh waiting for an email about potentially an NCAA tournament, selection Sunday media availability with the Panthers, and that didn't come either. And as it got later in the day, you have to assume they're not doing one, and it's probably for a reason. I didn't feel optimistic going into the weekend in the wake of the North Carolina State loss. Don't really see it as much of a surprise or a shock in that sense as well. I think I would have been more surprised if they did end up. I'm going to go back in 3, 2, 1. With that said, the Panthers were just narrowly left out of the NCAA tournament. They were one of the first 4 out teams, the last team in that first 4 out ranking alongside Oklahoma, Seton Hall, and Indiana State. They came mighty close. But one of the interesting things, and you mentioned some of the questionable decisions that you could maybe argue with the selection committee over, was Virginia making it in over the Panthers. They were one of the last 4 teams in. They'll be in the same position Pitt was. They'll go to Dayton next year, in the same position as Pitt was in last year. They will go to Dayton for the first 4 to play at UD Arena for a chance to move on to that first weekend. Pitt has the head-to-head win over Virginia. They finished the year on a higher note. They made it further in the ACC tournament, and they had a higher net in KenPom ranking as well. What do you make of this? This seemed like one of the most questionable decisions, and one that you can draw a real direct 1-to-1 kind of comparison to. That you've seen Virginia and Pitt on the court. You've seen those 2 teams play each other, and then you stack up the resumes. It seemed a little bit questionable that Virginia was one of those teams that made it in over Pitt. I think you could understand a little bit more if it was maybe an Indiana State or even in Oklahoma or even a Seton Hall. But the fact that it was Virginia, does that make much sense of all to you?
No, it doesn't, to be frank. The selection committee has talked a lot about moving more towards metrics being their main, source of information. for choosing who makes the field. Virginia does not grade out particularly well or favorably as compared to the other bubble teams in their metrics. And then even when you look at, like, if you want to go off the eye test and stuff like that, I don't think Virginia showed a ton or showed enough as to where they're in the field relatively safely. So, I think Pitt stacked up pretty well against them. The Panthers definitely had a case to make it above them. And so did, teams like Oklahoma, Seton Hall, Indiana State. So, Virginia, they technically didn't have any bad losses. And they had a decent enough resume. So it didn't come as a complete surprise. They were in that cluster with Pitt, the three Big East teams in Seton Hall, St. John's, Providence, Indiana State, Oklahoma, that were right on the cut line. I think they were maybe the biggest surprise team that made the field. So they rose above their competition. But yeah, I think it came as a little bit of a surprise that the selection committee favored them over some of the other options that just, objectively probably had better cases, truthfully.
Yeah, I don't have a problem necessarily with Virginia as a tournament team on their own, but I think it's when you look at the comparison between Pitt and Virginia, that's where the issue comes up. The fact that these guys were so close on the seeding line, but Virginia gets the nod for what? I mean, having fewer worse losses. I guess that does count. But you look at Pitt, and I mean, the vast majority of their bad losses come really early in the season when they were, arguably a different team. And I think that's what I kind of get stuck on. And then you throw in the fact that they have a head-to-head win over the Cavaliers. I think at some point that has to come into consideration as well, especially because all week and all weekend I've been hearing about how on the bubble margins, the margins are razor thin. And when you get down to the margins, even the smallest of things come into play. You want to look at the entire body of work, and the entire body of work are pretty comparable. But then also when you get down to it, these two teams played. You can determine who the better team is. Pitt beat them on the road by a healthy margin. And even then they have some better metrics than the Cavaliers as well. I mean, Pitt at a higher net and KenPom rating as well. And it's just, that was one of the baffling decisions as well. I think some of the other ones that might've been a little bit confusing were TCU and Northwestern. One of the things we heard about frequently in the lead up to Selection Sunday and even on Selection Sunday as well, was the importance of that non-conference strength of schedule ranking. And Pitt did not grade out well in that sense. They finished 340th in non-conference strength of schedule, according to KenPom. ESPN's Joe Lunardi told the Post-Gazette that the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, giving credit to Chris Carter here, that no bubble team had ever squeaked in with an at-large bid while holding a non-conference strength of schedule as low as Pitt did this year. That changes this year. TCU gets in with a non-conference strength of schedule at 357. Northwestern gets in with 355. We were told all along, the non-conference strength of schedule, that's really got to matter. But you look at a Northwestern team, 21 and 11, lower KenPom rating than Pitt, but they get a 9 seed. TCU 21 and 12 record this season, number 33 in KenPom, and they get a 9 seed as well. Doesn't seem like the non-conference strength of schedule factored in for these guys. Where was the difference here? Why do these teams gets higher seeds and get into the tournament over a team like Pitt in your mind?
I don't know if there's any explanation for it, because they also mentioned, the head of the selection committee, that Iowa State's, the main reason they weren't on the 1 seed line was because of their non-conference strength of scheduling. That essentially acted as the tiebreaker between them and North Carolina. But then you look at, like you said, TCU and Northwestern. I mean, it pretty much got thrown out of the window. And, Pitt's non-conference strength of schedule is really the only true negative on their resume. You can maybe point to the 2 quad 3 losses, but you also see teams like Texas A&M that got in with more of them than Pitt did. So, I don't think there's a ton of consistency, not a ton of transparency either. A lot goes into the decisions. I understand it's tough. And just, I think the idea of non-conference strength of scheduling being such a huge, determining factor for the committee it's a little wonky, in my opinion. That's another discussion for another day. But but yeah, I don't know if there's really any true explanation for it as we sit here right now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It just doesn't. I mean, I'm looking at TCU's schedule right now, looking at their resume, and I don't really see anything that jumps out to me as very different from Pitt's resume. I mean, they have a win over Oklahoma. That's at home. That's particularly impressive. They have a win over Baylor and Texas Tech as well. Um, but Pitt has that win over Duke. They have that win at Virginia, and you look at Northwestern's as well. They've got a win over Purdue. Other than that, it gets pretty dicey. I mean, they have a win over Illinois as well. Nebraska's a tournament team as well, but this is pretty light. You're just left kind of to wonder where the difference actually lies, because obviously that non-conference strength of schedule metric that we've heard all about all season long isn't what has separated them. It isn't what held Northwestern or TCU back, clearly, because they were 9 seeds. They weren't even on the bubble. I mean, this is clearly those aren't bubble teams when you get 9 seeds. Those are teams that are solidly in the field and probably have been solidly in the field for a long time, because neither of them made particularly impressive conference tournament runs. They didn't finish their seasons particularly strong, either of them. I mean, Northwestern lost 2 of their last 3 to finish the regular season, 3 of their last 4, if you include a Big Ten tournament loss to Wisconsin. And TCU lost 4 of their last 6, ending the regular season. So I'm just not sure where the difference comes from. I'm not sure why Pitt got punished for their non-conference strength of schedule, while Northwestern and TCU did not. We also got to talk about those bid stealers. I mean, Duquesne, Oregon, UAB, New Mexico, NC State, these teams that weren't in the NCAA tournament picture at all, particularly not as at-large people. Selection committee members said during the selection show that this was the first time since he had been on the selection committee that he had seen 5 bid stealers in a single year. I mean, at that point, does it even seem like Pitt had a chance when you see 5 teams, this many teams stealing bids from teams that are on the bubble like this? Because it seemed like they were fighting an uphill battle from that standpoint.
They definitely weren't. It was such a big difference from last year where there were no bid stealers, and Pitt snuck in as one of the last 4 and 2. It was just such an extraordinary set of circumstances with the 5 bid stealers. You saw it had ranging effects all over the field. Saw with the Mountain West, a lot of their teams were underseeded. I think that's part of the reason why was the amount of bid stealers. A lot of teams with tournament-worthy resumes left out that in other years would have made it. So the bubble it was a lot crazier, a lot more uncertainty coming into today. And I think that I have less of a feel of this year's field than in years past because of that. There was a wrench thrown into the entire thing. So yeah, I think Pitt got unlucky with it, after getting lucky last year. So sometimes that's just the name of the game, essentially. But it did lead to a lot more teams being left out that deserved to be in. And yeah, I think it's what makes college basketball so great. Conference, tournament week with the upsets and the bid steals, but you see the overall effect on days like today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree it's part of what makes the sport great, but this is the other side of it. You combine a really crowded bubble and an unusually crowded bubble with, uh, an unusually high number of bid stealers, and you're left with a lot of disappointed teams at the end of the day. A lot of teams that were certainly deserving and got left out. That's the thing. I think you can say that when we said that we weren't optimistic that Pitt was going to make it into the tournament, I think we both agreed that they were deserving. They were one of many deserving teams, but that everything we were hearing was telling us that they were going to get left out, and this is what ended up happening. The Pitt Panthers season is officially over. With all of that said, they declined an invitation to the National Invitational Tournament, the NIT. Jeff Capel released a statement shortly after the NCAA tournament selection show ended, saying that he and his team arrived at this decision collectively. It was a hard decision, but that they would not play in the NIT. Their 2023-24 season is over now. Jack, do you agree with the decision to bow out of the NIT to not play any more basketball this season?
I don't know if I would say I agree with it, but I do understand it to a certain degree, just based upon the fact that the way that the NCAA has the transfer portal set up, it opens tomorrow. I think a lot of teams just want to, wipe their hands clean and get started on the offseason. But I do think it would have been beneficial for Pitt to compete. It's another postseason tournament that has some level of prestige. I know it's not the NCAA tournament, but still. Would have been another chance for the guys to play together in front of a home crowd too. Pitt probably would have been a number one seed, had a home game on either Tuesday or Wednesday. Over the next couple of days, if they had accepted the invite, Hinson would have gotten one last chance to put on the jersey. So yeah, I think it's a little disappointing, but again, it makes sense. It's a trend that a lot of teams are sort of following. Indiana, Memphis, Ole Miss, St. John's have all declined invites too. I think we'll probably see a couple more before the selection show tonight. I think that's just the state of things in regards to the NIT. They've changed a lot with it. I believe that regular season champions no longer automatically qualify for the tournament. So that makes, the seeding and the selection for the tournament a bit off too. They don't play at MSG anymore. That's not a huge deal, but it does take away some of the allure of the tournament. So, for as fun as it would have been for Pitt to have another rodeo, especially with how stacked the tournament could have been this year, considering how deep the bubble was as compared to the other 2 other years. It's a little bit of a missed opportunity, but at the same time, I don't know if you can necessarily fault Pitt deciding not to participate after, a disappointing outcome today.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's understandable. I'm disappointed by it. Selfishly, I just like going to the Pete. Like you said, they could have gotten a home game. I think the city would have come out and supported them, especially because there is quite a bit of anger over missing the NCAA tournament. For all those reasons that you stated, I mean, allowing Blake Hinson to go out a winner, potentially to let him, kind of wash the taste of missing the NCAA tournament and a sour ending out of his mouth. I mean, you leave him with his last game an 0 for 5 from 3-point shooting performance, a 5-point game against North Carolina, and a loss. Just feels like an insufficient way for him to kind of end his career as a Panther. But either way, it is over. And then you have a freshman backcourt that would not get hurt by getting some more experience, and especially like you said, against some high level teams in the NIT, there will be a good field this year as long as teams stop declining bids. I mean, I saw St. John's declined an invitation as well. Don't know how many more will continue to do that. We'll see. I thought it could have been a net positive for Pitt. There might be some stuff going on behind the scenes. I mean, I watched Bub Carrington in the ACC tournament game against North Carolina. Seemed like he was maybe a little gimpy at some point coming out of the second for the second half. Seemed maybe there are some injuries that we don't know about that would make playing more basketball probably not worth it for this team. But I am selfishly, my own personal enjoyment, I'm a little disappointed, but I certainly do understand some of the logic because it's a long season. It's a difficult season, and for it to be in such a bitter end, I'm sure it's tough to get up for a tournament that is viewed as lesser, that still has, like you said, some prestige. But when you come that close to the big dance, to the big thing, to the biggest event in the sport, or one of the biggest events in all of sport, I can understand why it'd be disappointing and why you might not want to accept something to a lesser tournament. Well, with that, we're going to head out of here. Basketball season is over in the city of Pittsburgh, but it's an important offseason for the Panthers coming up. They'll look to get to work trying to replace Blake Hinson, retain those three guards, and move on to the 2024-2025 season. The offseason begins today, and the Panthers have a big one coming up. Thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate you all checking out Inside the Panthers on YouTube. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers, and follow all of our reporting for basketball's offseason, football and spring ball, and much, much more at InsideThePanthers.com. Appreciate you all tuning in and following us all season long, and we will see you next time.